Hello and welcome to Quick and Creepy, where the killers come to you.
In America in the late 1950s, a killer hunted for victims and committed horrific atrocities against them. This monster was responsible for the destruction of an entire family of 4 and at least 5 others simply to satisfy his evil urges. Melvin David Rees, the Sex Beast. Melvin Rees was born in 1933 in Maryland. After high school, he attended university, but quit before receiving any degree. His criminal career started soon after he dropped out of college. In 1955, he was arrested for attempting to drag a 36-year-old woman into his car. He escaped accountability from this act of violence because the victim declined to press charges against him. The jazz enthusiast would commit his first murder 2 years later in 1957. Margaret Harold was in a car with her boyfriend, Roy Hudson, on a secluded road when a man pulled up and approached their vehicle. It was Rees. He claimed to be the caretaker of the property, which they had parked along, before pulling a pistol on the pair and slipped into the back seat of their car. Rees then demanded money, and when Margaret refused, he fired a bullet into her head as her boyfriend ran for his life. When Roy returned to the scene with police, they found that Margaret's body had been abused after her death. When police searched the area, they found a cinder block shack which was Rees's hideout. The walls were plastered with pornography and photos of dead women. Along with these photos was a single more normal photograph. This was a picture out of a Maryland University yearbook of a young woman named Wanda Tipton, who had graduated in 1955 and who initially denied knowing anyone like the man the Margaret's boyfriend described. These initial acts of violence and murder were only a prelude to one of the most heinous acts imaginable: the murder of the Jackson family. The Jackson family was on a Sunday drive on January 11th in 1959. Mildred and her husband Carol and their 2 daughters, 5-year-old Susan and 18-month-old Janet, had gone out for a trip through the area around Apple Grove, an unincorporated section of Louisa County in Virginia. The entire family would not be seen alive again. A relative found the Jacksons' car while searching for them that same day after they did not return. It had been abandoned, and there was no trace of where the family had gone. While police searched the area, they were approached by a couple who told them that they had been forced off the road by an old blue Chevy earlier that day. Once the other driver had them stopped on the side of the road, he climbed out of his car and walked toward them. At this point, they were able to speed past him in their car and get away before he could get back in his own vehicle to follow them. 2 months after the family disappeared, their bodies began to show up. Carol Jackson was found first in a roadside ditch outside of Fredericksburg, Virginia. His hands were still bound by a necktie, and he had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. Horrifically, when his body was pulled from the mud, another body became visible. 18-month-old Janet had been alive, and she was tossed into the ditch and had apparently suffocated under her father's weight. In March, more than 2 months after they had disappeared, the bodies of Mildred and Susan Jackson were discovered. The location of their shallow graves was discovered by hunters, and they were only a stone's throw away from the place where Margaret Harold had been murdered only a couple years earlier. Both Mildred and her daughter had been assaulted and showed signs of blunt force trauma, which likely was the cause of death. Again, a shack was found nearby, and a button from Mildred's jacket was discovered inside. The police had made little progress in the murder cases in May when an anonymous letter showed up at the station. It said that a man named Melvin Rees was the murderer they sought. When they did a background check on Rees, they learned of his past and also found out about a relationship he had with Wanda Tipton years before, which she had previously denied. Unfortunately, they could not find any trace of Rees himself. There was a break in the case when the anonymous person sent a letter to police that Rees himself had written in 1960. This letter mentioned that Rees was working in a music shop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Police were able to apprehend Rees and searched his home in Hyattsville. In the house they found a case for a musical instrument, inside of which there was a pistol and descriptive notes of horrific acts of torture. Pinned to one of these note cards is a newspaper article with a photo of Mildred Jackson. This note included how the family had been found on a quiet, secluded road and said that he had, quote, killed the husband and baby. Now the mother and daughter were all mine. Once in custody, further investigation into Melvin Rees unearthed 4 additional murders in Maryland. 16-year-old Mary Scomet, 14-year-old and Ryan, 18-year-old Mary Fellers, and 16-year-old Shelby Venable had all been assaulted before they were murdered. Rees was convicted of the murder of Margaret Harold and sentenced to life in prison before he was sent to Virginia to face judgment for his crimes there. This time he was condemned to die for the evil he had committed. However, his death sentence was commuted to a life sentence in 1972, and he stayed locked up for more than 20 years until he died of natural causes in 1995.